teens and adolescents, and to create this new series and a promotional YouTube video for his upcoming book that will be called Will You Be My Friend? Understanding Your Child's Social Brain Through Childhood. So would you please welcome Greg Knippenberg.
Thank you very much. You didn't have to read all that. It's too much. Thank you very much, Sally. I'm going to try to do this sans. They were supposed to have the lapel mic, and I'm a hand talker. So if I hold that thing, it's going to limit my expressiveness. But if you need it, if folks in the back can't hear me, I'll grab the mic. I'm going to try to project enough so we don't need the mic. But again, thank you, Sally. It's fun. Sally, I saw Lucinda Green here, who's one of the organizers. Alyssa, Jenny Ernwine, who's my daughter's tutor and dear friend. And it's folks like that that make the world easier for the rest of us. So I've always said every parenting period is brain damaging. And that's with any child. And with an exceptional child, you're just increasing the amount of gray hair. And you need folks like that that are there to support us and to chip in and help out. And as part of our helping out with the festivities in April with the wine group, one of the balloons is going to have a free psychoeducational testing evaluation worth $1,400 that we're donating. So come to the thing, buy one of the balloons, and you'll pop it, and maybe you'll get a free testing. Either if your child needs testing for the first time or if your kid's in high school and they need testing for accommodations, SAT, and for college. So we're happy to do that. Tonight's topic, I come at it from 3 different perspectives. One, professionally. Sally mentioned the stuff I do professionally. The first part of this is from my video series that I've got. There's a flyer on that, and hoping to have an agent in New York who's interested, follow through on it. So I got the professional background, working at St. Anne's Episcopal. I'm the consultant there. I've developed a brain-based curriculum for helping kids understand all of this. So with 4th grade, I spent the entire 4th grade year talking about your president and executive functioning. So today I'm going to teach you something about your kid's brain and how they function socially and emotionally. And then we'll talk about the interplay with having LD, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, how that impacts those areas of brain functioning, and then strategies to use as parents. I also approach it as, from a parenting level. So my wife and I, second marriage, we have an adult child. Do I need to? Oh, okay, I'll try. But now I only got one hand. Okay, you need it, okay. So we have an adult daughter with ADHD and are transitioning in how we approach her. And where do we support, where do we let go, how do we foster her into adulthood? So lots of stories there, especially when she comes by to visit, and last week it was our younger daughter's girlfriend came over and she said, I found this phone charger out in the street. I'm like, oh, I know whose that is. Getting in her car, she somehow dropped her phone charger. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff we find. Also, my wife and I adopted a little girl this summer, Lily. She's 8H. I'll tell you some about her tonight. But she has ADHD and was 2 years behind in her learning when she came into our home. And I got to tell you, Jenny Ernwine has been her tutor and has done amazing work with her. And my wife works with her all the time. Every day they work together. She makes it fun, positive. And we just found out Lily got tested last week. She's gained 2 years in the last 6 months in her reading. And it's really been exciting. So on a parenting level, I've seen her go from extremely frustrated and extremely resistant to doing the reading and the little card games and stuff, to just being a joyful reader who is proud and excited of herself and jumps into things. And the fact the other day she spelled a word I couldn't figure out how to spell. And she felt so proud. So on a personal level, I also come at it from a personal perspective. Sally mentioned that upcoming thing where you get to pretend you're LD, a simulation or whatever. I don't need that. I'm dyslexic myself. So I will tell you some stories later on as we get into it. But I wrote 2 chapters in a book that's coming out with the NPR educational editor this spring on invisible disabilities, including dyslexia. First chapter was on, well, what is dyslexia? And then the second chapter was my story called I Was a Turtle. And in 1st grade, I was in the turtle reading group. So I've got lots of personal experience through all those years of being dyslexic myself. So I'm coming at it a variety of ways. First thing we're going to do tonight, we'll talk about the brain. We're going to go through 3 areas fairly quickly. What helps me when I understand the brain and I understand the kids and I help them understand it, it helps me think of interventions or strategies, one. And secondly, it helps me be a lot more patient as a therapist, as an educator, as a parent. I'm much more patient if I can just go, oh, I see our president's checked out because it's 8 o'clock, it's 8:15, and guess what part of your brain shuts down first when you're falling asleep? Your self-control system. And guess what part stays on for a while longer? Your emotions, right? How many of your kids have some nighttime fears, anxieties, temper outbursts, all of a sudden we're playing games? It's all about understanding that brain. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to turn and look specifically at exceptional students. And again, I'm assuming many of you have students who just have dyslexia. Others of you have students who dyslexia and maybe ADHD as well. And maybe we got a few folks with kids who are in the autism spectrum disorder, the Asperger syndrome. So I'm going to kind of put those together as we go through it. The other thing that's wonderful for me is doing talks, is being in the office all day. I get new material every day. I met with this little second grade girl today who's got some anger issues on the playground. She's an exceptional student, and she showed me her two little sticky notes of 10 rules she came up for herself on how to handle conflict at the playground, one of which was to keep her voice low. And I looked at her and I said, that's a great idea. That's really good, because she can really yell. So she's got her own little strategies, and she's going to try to utilize those to be more successful on the playground. I was meeting with a little third grade girl the other day. She struggles with math. She has a math disability and is incredibly anxious that when the teacher passes out the math paper that they're going to go over in class. What is she afraid of? She's going to get called on, okay? Now, her impulse is to do what? Do you remember this? Hide. You hide. You try to sit behind somebody bigger, kind of look down, you keep your head down, you pretend you're working, right? And you're just hoping you don't get called on. And I said, honey, that's the worst thing you can do, because teachers are always looking for the kids that aren't looking at you or trying to hide. They go after you. So what you want to do, as soon as you get your sheet, scan it really quick, find 2 or 3 problems that you know the answer to, write it down quick, and when the teacher, try to go early, like second or third kid, when the teacher gets to that one, find one at the top you know, shoot your hand up. And the teacher will be like, oh, she's participating, that's great, right? And all you need, I said, all you need to do is answer one and you're set. You don't have to answer anymore, then you don't have to worry. But that impulse is to hide. I did a lot of hiding myself as a kid when it came to being asked to read, right? And finally, I learned one this Sunday at Mass. So we got there early, and we're walking in, and one of the assistants to the priest says to my wife, would you like to read the gospel lesson out of the Bible? And she's like, sure. She was a teacher for 27 years, great reader. And I learned right then, never go to Mass early. Because if I had been in front of her and they had asked me, I would have been like, no thank you. That's not going to happen. And I told this little girl last week, I said, you know, I'd get up and preach. I'd do that in a heartbeat. But I will not read in front of people, and especially out of the Bible. Have you ever seen some of the words in the Bible? Right? When my son is here tonight, Alex is in the back, he's filming. He came down from CU Boulder. He went to school with Lucinda Green's son, Jack, who's up in, they see each other in Boulder all the time, but they went to St. Anne's together. But when he was in preschool, I'd come read the class, and I'd let him pick the book. Which author did I just cringe when he picked it? Dr. Seuss. And I'd be like, oh my God, what's that word? I'd ask the teacher, sometimes I'd ask the kids, I'm like, how do you say that? You know, what's that one? Dr. Seuss. And when he was in about 3rd grade, I started reading that Harry Potter thing. And I saw that girl's name before the movie came out. Now the movie came out, I know it's Hermione. But when I'm reading it, I looked at that name and I'm like, I'm just going to call her Sue. And I read the first 2 volumes of Harry Potter calling her Sue. And now I've been stuck on volume 3, page 16 for like the last 10 years. I just kind of burned out on it. But I actually read the first 2 and they were thick. But trying to get that name, that was a tough one. And kids' names now today are like incredibly difficult to pronounce. It's hard to figure those out. So that's the perspective we're coming from. And I want to crank it out to slide number 1, executive functioning. This is what I like to call for the kids, the president. So this part of your brain right up here, your frontal lobe, okay? Now, it's going to do several things for us. One, it helps us pay attention, like paying attention to me right now. It also helps you switch your focus. So if your kid is really paying attention to their Legos, And you say, well, now, honey, remember we said you could do that till 3:45, then you got to get started on the homework. What's that little president need to be able to do? Put the Legos down and get started on the subject, right? So it's being able to attend, it's also, and avoid distractions, it's also being able to switch. So in the classroom, for some of our kids with executive functioning difficulties or ADHD, they take longer to get started because organization's a problem. So the teacher starts on spelling and the kids all get started and they're still looking for their pencil, and then when they find their pencil, what do they have to do like every class? Go up and sharpen it, right? You're like, you just sharpened it an hour ago. Why do you have to do it again? The pencil's like this big now because the kids always sharpen it. They finally get back, they get started. They're 10 minutes late getting started. Then the teacher says, okay, time to switch over to math or whatever, right? It takes them another 5 minutes to stop what they're working on, another 5 minutes to get going on that. They're always running behind. It's that difficulty with switching their focus on to the next thing. Does that make sense? As well as attending and avoiding distractions. So it's ability to avoid distractions while you're working. Impulse and emotional control, it is the brakes for your brain. When you feel something, excitement, an urge to do something, frustration, sadness, anxiety, it is the brakes, okay? So it's gonna tell, when that kid wants to, they're playing kickball and the ball goes across the street. The little kid's impulse is to do what? Run and get the ball, right? Now you're hoping their president says what? Stop before you hit the street and look both ways, okay? So it's that stop mechanism. It could be the anxious child who starts to get their anxiety going because they're going to get shots today. For me, it was the dentist, going to the dentist. They get all freaked out and anxious. And they just get rocked and rolling, and all of a sudden they've just worked themselves at a big tizzy over something they could do easily, right? And then afterwards they're like, oh, I'm fine now, and you're a wreck because you just saw them melt down for a half hour in anxiety, and you're like, what do you mean? I told you should have just done it. So it's that. It could be anger, getting pissed, right? So if I'm driving a car tonight home and somebody cuts me off, there's part of me that wants to do what? Put up a certain finger, right? Honk the horn, right? My president's supposed to say stop. Don't do that. Now what's really cool, so right on the right side of your brain, right underneath your president, there's another little part of your brain that I like to call the thinking, feeling brain. And if you can stop the impulses, it'll kick it down there and you can actually think about your feelings, what you're feeling right then. So if I'm driving, to do the driving example, let's say I don't honk the horn, and then I just think to myself, well, you know, maybe that person's in a hurry. Maybe I was going kind of slow in the fast lane. Maybe it's my fault, right? Or I could just think to myself, everybody's a child of God. I'll just wave and let them go on, right? I can think about my feelings, and when I do that, then I can turn my feelings off. I can get them down or turn them off, and we'll talk about the feelings section next. Movement control centers right in the middle of your frontal lobe. Is anybody here a fidgeter? You all are sitting so still. We don't have any fidgeters? Whoa, I'm constantly fidgeting with something, okay? So one time I was talking about this in a class of fourth grade boys. It was in my son's class, and one of his classmates jumped up on top of his chair and said, that's me! And I'm like, yeah, that is you. Yeah, good example. That's the movement control, and that could be the hyperactivity, or again, it just could be the fidgeting. You know, kids that really do need to fidget, and if you let them fidget in the classroom, guess what? They focus. Now the teacher sees them fidgeting, what's the teacher think? You're not focused, you're not paying attention. Doodling for some kids really helps them focus. I'm a doodler, I like to doodle, and I actually pay attention. My son and I used to go to church here at Bethany, and I draw all sorts of stuff on the bulletin. Now when he was little, he'd be drawing jet fighters, like blowing things up. I don't think he was focused on the sermon, but I can doodle and pay attention. Time management, the ability to perceive time, not just read a clock, but be able to kind of figure out how long will something take me? So your kid comes home, you say, the first thing that you always say, which you shouldn't, is, how much homework do you have, right? That shouldn't be the first thing you say to your kids, but it usually is. And then you say, well, how long is it going to take? And your kids say, well, it's only like 30 minutes. Can I play first? Can I do Minecraft, okay? And you're like, well, yeah, I guess it's only 30 minutes. Are you sure? Oh, yeah, it's just 30 minutes, okay? They play their Minecraft, you finally get them off the Minecraft, they start the project, and they say, well, now, we need to go to the library first to get the book. Yeah, it's a report, it's due tomorrow, okay? So they're not estimating time for their studies or anything else. So there are some kids that when they get that report on Monday, they immediately start thinking, okay, tonight I'll get the book, tomorrow I'll start reading, I'll read half, the next day I'll finish reading and write my outline, the next day I'll write my paper, and I'll have an extra day to review it, okay? Other of your kids are like, I don't have any homework till Thursday. Cool, right? At 9 o'clock at night, we're starting to try to work on it. Now, the time management also comes into safety. So the kid kicks the kickball across the street. Let's say he stops, he looks both ways, he sees a car coming. What does the brain have to calculate? How fast is that car coming? How far, how long before they get to point A where I'm crossing? Do I have enough time? Okay? If it's the same thing when you're making a left turn. If you made a left turn up here to get into Bethany, you're coming across Hampton, right? You got to calculate how fast those cars are coming at you. If you do a good job of calculation, you're fine. If you're off a little bit, what do you get? The horn. Somebody's honking at you, right? If you're way off, you get broadsided, right? You get T-bone, okay? Left turn's the hardest for the teen driver. We'll talk about the teen brain a little bit. It's that ability to estimate time. Now, for ADHD people, on average, they're off by 50%. They cannot estimate time. They think they've got all the time in the world. So you might, it might be your husband, and you say, now, honey, we don't want to be late for the dinner party. We were late last time. We got to leave in 10 minutes. Oh, yes, dear, that's fine. I just got to touch up the painting a little bit on the side of the house. I got plenty of time, right? Not estimating how long things will take. And it does play a critical role in safety when you think about some of the accidents that can happen, especially for the teenagers. So being able to manage time. Working memory, teacher says, okay, kids, get out your math book, turn to page 12, do number 16. Johnny's got to find the book. He's got to find his pencil. He's got to go sharpen it. Finally sits back down. What page? What did I say? 12, right? What problem? 16, very good. We got some good frontal lobes in here. We got a lot of women. You're higher up on the scale. So you got to remember that for just a short amount of time. Now, do you need to remember that the rest of your life? No. Once you've done it, it's gone. It's like when you're reading the newspaper, you're on the front page and it says go to 6C. You got to remember as you're turning it to get to 6. Now, at my age, if I drink coffee or pet the dog while I'm turning, what happens? Oh, man, what page? And I got to go back. And then I got to remember, what was I even reading about? I don't remember anymore. So that's that ability to hold on to stuff. And kids with executive functioning difficulties really struggle with keeping those 2 or 3 things in their brain. So you do one at a time, right? Because it's just too much. They lose it. It's the etch-a-sketch memory. And finally, gating. Gating is the ability, now this is a pretty quiet room. I haven't heard much. Gating is the ability to filter out distractions that your senses are picking up. So it could be a sound outside. It could be, if a car was turning, their lights came through the window over there. It could be the feel of your seat. Or if you're a little kid, you remember what the shirt tags felt like on your shirt? Right? Remember getting irritated? And just like, oh, it's just bothering me, okay? You get sensory sensitivities, right? On a gross level, it could be the guy sitting next to you just farted. And you're smelling it. Now, what your frontal lobe does is say, block that one out, block that one out, block that one out, focus on this one, okay? It closes the gate on the other senses and tells you which one at a time you should pay attention to. For kids with executive functioning difficulty, what happens? They're squirming around, right? Ooh, you tooted, right? Oh, wow, wonder what kind of car that is, right? They can't gate stuff out. They just go from one stimulation to the next. Now, as an educator, I've concluded, and if you're a teacher in here, you'll probably agree that the world of maintenance, school maintenance workers has the secret conspiracy, which is at about 9 o'clock in the morning, they either fire up the lawnmower, the leaf blower, or the snow blower. And they love to go right in front of the classroom windows, right? And what happens to the kids, especially the boys? Well, we're looking out the window, right? We're getting off, right? So not being able to gate stuff out. Now, if you did the scale of executive functioning, if we all took a test, if we gave all third graders a test, some of you would score 90th percentile. You have great frontal lobe functioning. Average female is about the 80th percentile. The genetic material for frontal lobe development is on the X chromosome. So basically, women have 2 blueprints of the chromosome. They have better frontal lobes. So women do a much better job at paying attention and focused, and there's lots of evolutionary reasons that scientists think that's why it is, right? Not only takes you to watch TV with your husband, women, when they watch TV, usually do what? They watch the show, right? Where's the remote? It's like they don't even know where the remote is. They just watch the show. What's the guy do? Click, 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 click. The average man's about the 50th percentile. We get bored quicker. We get distracted easier. We like movement. We like stimulation, right? So we're about 50th percentile. If you're about 10th percentile or lower, that would be ADHD. So if you take the test and you're in that 8, 9 percentile or lower, then you would fit ADHD. Does that make sense? So we're all on a spectrum. And some kids have great executive functioning, others don't. For me as a reader, I had pretty good executive functioning for a guy. I also had a great memory. So for me, I still can't do phonics. But how did I learn to read? What did I do? Whole word. I did whole word. And that was the trend. It was the late 60s. It was started in New Zealand, and everybody in St. Louis was doing whole word. Now there's states that have outlawed it. But it actually was very functional for me. I could just memorize all the words. I didn't have, and I'm fine unless I read the Bible and see some name I've never seen or read Harry Potter again. I'm pretty much okay. So some of your kids, if they're struggling with ADHD and dyslexia, it's going to be a lot tougher, right? Versus if you've got good executive functioning. Last couple points on this. The marshmallow test, we don't have much time, but it's just basically, they did it with preschoolers back in the 50s. If you offered a kid a marshmallow and you said, don't eat it for 10 minutes, I'll come back and give you 4 more. In the research they found, about a third of the kids, they just ate that puppy right away. They couldn't resist it all. Another third picked at it, poked at it, tried not to eat it, sat on their hands. They're the funniest ones to watch. And eventually, what'd they do? They ate it. And another third just sat there delightfully, didn't even look at it. They looked out the window. 10 minutes later, they got 4 more marshmallows, okay? That's the test for executive functioning. How well can you resist those impulses? Now, they followed up those kids. They're my age now. They followed them for 4 decades. And results-wise, the kids who could resist the marshmallow are doing far better on like every level, including the latest. They're looking at health outcomes, rates of obesity, heart disease, fitness levels, and the resistors are doing much better. The kids who ate the marshmallows right away really struggle. They had all sorts of problems compared to the other group. So that executive functioning is a key skill. Dopamine is one of the main neurotransmitters that's used. Just in terms of development, do 3-year-olds have much of a president? No. Okay, you're the president for the 3-year-old. Girls develop about 2 years ahead of boys. They're about 18 months to 2 years ahead. If I go to a kindergarten classroom, most of the girls in kindergarten are doing what? Sitting crisscross applesauce. And they look so cute. They got their little outfits on and their hair looks nice. And they're sitting politely, and when they want to answer a question, what do? They raise their hand, right? And they're so cheerful. What are all the boys doing? Most of them. They're spinning around. They're sitting by the blocks. They're laying on their buddy. They got lunch all over their shirt. Their hair's sticking out all over the place, and they got grass stains. And when they do answer, they just blurt it out, and half the time it's not on the topic anyway. And then when they're done talking, they go, "Oh!" You're like, well, you already talked, man. It's a little late for that, right? So about 1.5 years, 2 years ahead. By 3rd or 4th grade, you're hoping all the little children are on that scale, right? You're kind of hoping they're on that scale. They have a decent frontal lobe. It's pretty small. It's going to really develop in adolescence. In adolescence, one of the neurotransmitters that runs it is called dopamine. Dopamine levels dropping about in half, and you see teenagers who all of them look pretty ADHD. So they're distractible, they're disorganized, bounce along like ping pong balls. We'll talk about why in a couple seconds. But it does pick up eventually around, latest research, 26 for girls and 28 for boys. It's finally cooked. So if you were, car companies don't rent to you till you're 21, because if you gave a Corvette or a Lamborghini to someone younger, like Justin Bieber, what are they going to do? They're going to fly through the neighborhood in the Lamborghini, right? They can't control those impulses. But it's about 26 to 28 before it's developed. The brain speeds up till you're about 35. Myelination is a process of coating on the brain cells. That continues till you're about 35. Your brain gets faster and faster. And actually, your little kids, your preschoolers, their brain goes at about 2 miles an hour. By the time they're 35, it goes at 200 miles an hour. Our brain fires that fast. After 35, guess what? It starts to slow down, and as you get older, guess what happens to myelination? It deteriorates, right? So it slowly deteriorates. So your brain gets slower, you know. So there's a reason Grandpa takes a while to get it out and repeats himself 3 times. The myelination is starting to go. Okay, let's do the next slide. So that's the president. That's just looking at ADHD kids. They looked at the development of the frontal lobe with brain imaging. This is the neurotypical group here. That's the ADHD group. And the white area is the undeveloped area of the brain. This is starting at age 6. So you can see that on the left side, the 6-year-old's got some purple there in the frontal lobe. Do you see that? Where the ADHD kid barely has any started. And you can follow it through age 11. The good news is you can see that the child with ADHD, their frontal lobe is developing. It's coming along. But you can see it typically looks like 2 or 3 years behind. So you see sort of this lag between where they are and their neurotypical peer group. They haven't done it on after age 11. I haven't seen anything from 12 on up. So we do see development in the frontal lobe, but it's behind, right? Now, every year in school, what do the teachers expect you to do? Sit still. We went from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. 4th grade, 5th grade, how long you got to sit? You're pushing 30, 45 minutes, right? Middle school, St. Anne's middle school classes now, if you have the extended block, I think it's an hour and a half, right? That's a lot of pressure on that frontal lobe. So for the kids that are behind, it's a lot tougher. Next one. Next area of the brain quick is our emotional system. I like to call this the furnace. It's just like the furnace in your house, cranking out chemicals throughout your body that some people have this thermostat that's like set at 68. Anything could happen to them and they're just fine. They don't get all upset or rattled. Other people are a little bit more variable. And it's the brain, the limbic system produces about 300 different chemicals that go throughout our brain and body and causes our feelings. That's what makes our feelings. Now, I like to think about your child's temperament, so if you'll just hit the next one. I made up a little riddle about holding on to happiness. How well does your child hold on to happiness? This isn't in your PowerPoint. So I used the Winnie the Pooh characters, and we'll start with Winnie the Pooh. So the riddle goes that the Winnie the Pooh characters decided to go for a walk in the forest. And Pooh goes first, and he's pretty happy. Pooh's a pretty happy guy. He's like an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. And Pooh falls over a rock. He falls down, gets a little scuffed up, and he's laying there. What does Winnie the Pooh say? I'll come over here for a while. What's he say? Oh, bother, right? It's like, oh, bother. He gets up, brushes himself off, and he said, but there might be honey in the tree. And he goes on, and how does he feel? Happy. So if you look at his line, he's at an 8. He dips down a little bit, but he recovers pretty quick, and he's back up. He's a happy guy, okay? Piglet's pretty happy, the little pink guy, right? The kids always put him at about a 6. Piglet trips over the rock, and he says, oh no, I better go home. There's going to be more rocks. I'm going to fall down. I'm going to get hurt. I can't walk. And he scurries back home, and it takes him forever to calm back down again, okay? So it takes him a long time to get back to happiness because his anxiety gets in the way. So some of you have piglets for kids. They're a little bit more like Piglet. One of the 4th graders once said to me, Mr. Knippenberg, if you were 4 inches tall and pink and you blew away in the wind, you'd be nervous too. And I'm like, yeah, I suppose I would. That makes sense. Now, Rabbit's like Mr. OCD guy. He's happy if he's in his garden by himself and everything's in order, right, or in his little hole. And when things don't go his way, if Eeyore shows up, I mean, not Eeyore, Tigger shows up, what happens to Rabbit? He's pissed, right? So if Rabbit went on the walk, he fell over the rock, he'd say, that rock's not my friend. I hate rocks. I don't want to be friends with any rocks. And he would storm through the woods on his walk, and every time he'd see a rock, he'd be like, I don't want to be friends with that rock either, right? Because this anger gets in the way. Some of you got kids who on the playground get pretty pissed pretty quick, and they carry it into the classroom, and they say someone was cheating again, and they're all upset and mad, right? You got a rabbit. Eeyore goes on the rock, trips over the rock, and he says, even the rocks don't want to be my friend. Nobody wants to be my friend. And he'd walk along, and every time he'd see a rock, he'll say, there's another rock that doesn't want to be my friend, right? He just can't hold on to the happiness. He's not particularly happy himself. When something happened, that sadness rushes in, right? And just feels defeated or helpless or hopeless, okay? Now, one of the kids told me once, well, you know, he can't find his tail. That's why his tail falls off. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he needs to go to Home Depot and get duct tape and put it on, right? So if you got a problem, shouldn't you solve it? Would you see Eeyore solving it? No, he feels hopeless and helpless. He's sort of the victim of this tail that keeps falling off. And even in reality, says something different. So even if one of the characters says, I'm your friend, Eeyore, Eeyore will say, yes, but no one wants to be my friend. He just can't let go of the sadness. Now, if Tigger fell off over the rock, Tigger would say, that was great, I want to do it again. And he'd keep doing it until he was bloody and bruised, and he'd go home at night going, that's the best walk I've ever been on in my life, right? He's just full of excitement. He is the prototype of Mr. ADHD, okay? So you sort of need to know, which temperament does your kid have? And if you'll click it again, we'll get back to this one. Back to the president. So we're going to talk about emotional basketball. Think about your kid's emotions. Emotions come from down here in your brain. It's right around your brainstem. The limbic center is right down here. So your average 4-year-old, 3 and 4-year-old, do they have a lot of emotions? Yeah, if they don't get the cookie at the Safeway, at the bakery, what happens? The big temper tantrum. So it's like, think of the offense coming down the court. We'll say the defense is the Nuggets, since we are really bad right now. But they got 4 big guys coming down the court with the ball. And that 3-year-old has one short little guy named Bob trying to stop him. Okay, that's the president of a little preschooler. It's not much. So who's usually going to win? The emotions. The emotions are going to take over. We got the temper tantrum. Now, by about 2nd grade, 1st grade, you'll see a dampening in the emotional system. So now we've got 2 players coming down the court. For most kids, their emotions dampen. Okay, now if you've got a piglet or the Eeyore or the rabbit, they're going to have 3 or 4 players. Okay, but the average kid, we got 2 players coming down the court, and now by 2nd grade, we've got 2 pretty good defenders playing defense. Okay, so what happens now? They break it up, right? You're hoping they stop the emotions. Do the emotions still score sometime? Of course, right? But by and large, they're doing better. They even have little sayings with each other about you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? And all the kids know you're not supposed to throw a fit. And if you're one of those kids that gets too emotional, what do they call you? Crybaby, right? You know, you're showing too much emotions. You're supposed to be able to handle it. So 3rd, 4th grade, we've got a pretty good matchup. The teen brain, you got doubling the emotion. For the average kid, their emotions double. Okay, the reactivity of their emotional center is twice as much as a younger child, or twice as much as an adult. Okay, they got 4 players coming on the court, and they're big and fast. Dopamine levels drop in the frontal lobe during adolescence while it's developing. It's developing incredibly fast during adolescence, and it just can't do the job. So most middle schoolers, again, look pretty ADHD. So they've got one small guy back named Bob playing defense. And what happens? The emotions score. You got Romeo and Juliet, right? You look at the paper every Monday morning, there's stories from the weekend about the teenagers who their impulses got the best of them, right? They got all emotional and they did something stupid. Now, for the average guy, when you say to him, why'd you do that? What's the average teen guy say? I don't know. It was an accident, right? I love the Lorax, when the Lorax said to the kid, if a guy does something stupid once, it's just because he's a guy. And I'm thinking, yeah, he's right. But if a guy does the same thing twice, the stupid thing twice, it's probably because of a girl, right? And those teenagers, as things kick in, do a lot of things to try to impress the ladies, right? And it goes both ways. So that whole system in the teen years really gets off. We don't have enough time to do the hormones tonight. Suffice it to say that the teen hormone system turning on and cranking up makes it really interesting. And it's not real consistent, it's pretty variable, and it gets pretty intense. Next one. Third area is what I like to call the mirror, which is your nonverbal processing system, your ability to be a social person, to recognize people's facial expressions, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So real quick, everybody, give me an inviting look. Like I'm coming into the lunchroom with my tray. I'm the new middle school student. I'm coming in with my tray. There's all you strange people. Now look at me like I could sit by you. You know, like you're inviting me to sit by you, right? Okay? Now look at me like you think I'm a total dork and you don't want anything to do with me. Give me a look. That's good, right? I've had a few sometimes, mostly from the women, where you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna run. That's intense, right? So it's the ability to use facial expressions, tone of voice, body position, everything that's not the spoken word, is to be able to use that to communicate and to be able to read it as well. So if you'll flip the next slide, we'll do a little test. This is from the eye test. The actual eye test is 400 of these slides. They're just eyes, and you have to decide what is the person feeling, okay? So on A, what do you think? Apologetic, friendly, uneasy, or dispirited? Somebody say it. Come on. Uneasy. Yeah, uneasy. B, that's the top right. Playful, comforting, irritated, or bored? Playful, very good. We're 2 for 2. C, joking, flustered, desire, or convinced? Desire. I was at Denver Academy doing this talk for the teenagers, and this one guy said, desire. And I said, you're going to do well with the ladies, young man. You got it. D, cautious, insisting, bored, or aghast? Yeah, cautious. If you look at, like, right here between the eyes, it's almost like it's pulling back, right? Like he's pulling away. E, despondent, relieved, shy, or excited? Despondent. Wow, we're kicking butt. F, annoyed, hostile, horrified, or preoccupied? I'm trying to remember. It's either preoccupied or annoyed. I can't remember. It's one of those two, right? Now, on the actual test, when you give this to subjects, the average female scores about the 80th percentile, okay? Women do a lot more processing of social information. The average male is about the 50th percentile, okay? There's a couple of reasons for that. The area of the brain that connects your hemispheres, okay? So you got the two hemispheres. We're looking at the brain from the top. In the middle is called the corpus callosum. It connects the two hemispheres. It's like a giant highway that connects the two halves of the brain. And what it does is it collects information from all your senses, and it brings it across the highway to the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere paints this bigger picture of how I should function socially. It puts it all together in a big picture, like a stained glass window, okay? The corpus callosum for women, adult women, is about twice the size than men. Jeff Foxworthy said the average female has an 8-lane superhighway when it comes to social functioning. The average guy has a 2-lane country road. And it's true, because we're also slower. It's sped up by estrogen. Women, in your hormone levels, you got 80% of it's estrogen. So women do social stuff really fast, okay? The average guy, we only have about 20% estrogen. So we're much slower at the social processing. We do it lower in the brain. Our emotions are processed lower in the brain as well. So often a woman will say to her husband, well, don't you feel upset by that? Or how do you feel? And what's your husband say? Fine. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. And he really isn't lying. He's telling you the truth. We just don't respond to it as much. The average guy. Now, if you have 1% more estrogen, you're called the new age guy, the sensitive Alan-Alda type. It's the 21. If you have 1% extra estrogen, you score higher compared to other guys, because you're doing it a little bit faster than the other guys. Some of your students, some of your kids, how many of you have a social butterfly that since the day they're born just can go in and interact with everybody, right? Alex's cousin, who's also his age, Emily, she was the belle of the ball in kindergarten, all through high school. She knew everybody. She just could socialize. She just knew how to do it, right? How many of you have a kid maybe that's a little more on the awkward side? Okay, so that would be if you get down that lower 10th percentile or so, then you're looking at the new diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder. That would be your Asperger kids. They're going to be down on this end. So they really don't take in all that information and synthesize it into a very complex picture. How did you pick your seat today? Imagine if you were a middle schooler going into the classroom. It's an open classroom. It's the start of the year, maybe the second week. They've got tables with 2 chairs at each table. And as you're coming in the room, the teacher says, okay, everybody take a seat. Now, if you're the average middle schooler, what do you have to think about for picking your seat? What do you look for? Where's my friends? That's good. What else? What's that? Oh, wait, do I want to sit by a same gender? Go to the other gender? What could happen if you go to the other gender and sit by them? Somebody making fun of you or something, right? You also got to notice, well, who sits by who usually? So if she's always saving a seat for Susie, and the seat's open, and I come in, and they always sit together, and I sit down there, what's she going to do? She's going to look at me and go, loser, what are you doing? Right? Everybody knows Susie sits there. And then as I walk away, she'll be like, double loser, right? So I'm not reading that, oh, this is who usually sits with who, okay? Do I need to think about enemies? Yeah, who plays pranks? Who wants to do pranks? If I didn't do my homework, where am I going to try to sit? Probably in the back, right? If I'm trying to brown nose a teacher, I'm going to sit in the front, right? Now, if we kept going, you can think of 30, 40, 50 different reasons why people would sit where they do. For the people on the lower end, they often maybe just look for an open seat. And they sit next to this lady, or they sit next to the kid that just bullied them the hour before, completely unaware of the fact that he's probably going to do it again, right? They're just not reading the social nuances of the situation. Does that make sense? So again, you've got the average female 80th percentile, average guy's 50th percentile, and then the kids on the spectrum are at a lower level. So that's going to determine a lot about their social functioning, okay? Next slide. Oh, this is walking to the cafeteria, the kid walking in the cafeteria. We'll do it quick. Which table should he sit at? What do you think? If he doesn't know where to sit, what do you think? Which would be the easiest, probably the most predictable? The boys up in the right corner just reading, right? The boys down here, they're up to shenanigans, right? They're horsing around. So if he sits there, could he get tied up in some of that stuff, right? Now, unless he likes that kind of stuff, otherwise maybe there. The 2 girls talking, look, they're best friends, and then you got the couple that's dating. Do you really want to interrupt them, right? So that'd probably be the safest bet. All right, next one. Okay, quick, the teen brain. It's basically doing what it's supposed to do. Next one, I have a little paragraph. I'm not going to take the time to read it. I published this a couple years ago. Basically, the idea for the teen brain is they need to be risk takers, they need to be impulsive, they need to be driven by their emotions. Because what do they need to do? They need to get out and conquer the world. Think about our ancestors. 18-year-old guys were doing what? Hunting and fighting. They were helping us survive, right? Falling in love, having babies, make a house, protect your village. You're run by passion, okay? So when they recruit soldiers, do they want 40-year-old guys with a mortgage? No. Who do you want? The young guys, the risk takers. I had a talk with 7th graders the other day, and I said, you know, I'm wondering if Shaun White's brain has matured too much. Because he didn't take a risk on that first event. He thought it was too dangerous, right? He's got too much to lose. He's thinking about his injury and healing time. What's the 18-year-old guy thinking? Oh, I'm going to try a new trick on that one, right? They're the risk takers, and we need that. And they need to live in community. They have to survive with their peers. So when your teenager says, you can't take away my cell phone, I've got to talk to Jessica tonight. It'll destroy me if you don't let me. Guess what? She actually really feels that way. Because there's this desire to be connected. Because in our ancestors, if you got left out of the group, if they kicked you out, what happened to you? You died. You had to be with your peers. So they have these intense emotions about that peer connection. And at the same time, this 24/7 thing of avoiding being embarrassed by your father or your mother or your siblings anything that might embarrass you in front of your peers, right? There's just this fundamental drive to connect. So you do see their social systems really crank up, especially third, fourth grade. They become a little more socially sophisticated. They start a little more sarcastic. And then around fifth and sixth grade, guess what starts up? Body part jokes, right? I had a kid look at this slide, that class slide of the two hemispheres, and she was giggling. And the fifth grade girl, I'm like, what's so funny? She's like, don't you see her picture of the brain? It looks like a butt. I'm like, oh my God, I was not thinking about a butt, right? When you're teaching seventh graders, I had eighth graders this morning, there's hardly any word in the English language that you can say without it having a double meaning of some sort. And then I'm clueless about it, right? And I'll be talking just benignly and say something I know, of course, never to say, and the two characters were doing it. If you say that one a bunch of eighth graders, you're getting nothing but laughter, right? But there's all these other words for drugs and everything and all sorts of sex, and you're just like, God, I can't talk anymore without them making some reference and some sarcasm, right? That stuff is really cranking up. Next one. Here's the teen brain we mentioned, half the frontal lobe functioning. It about drops in half, twice the emotion, and increased nonverbal processing, okay? And while they're learning to be social people, so the middle schoolers of today, your kids are learning how to be tomorrow's politicians, how to influence others, right? But in middle school, is it pretty ugly sometimes? Yeah, it can be pretty cruel and pretty mean. And the analogy I like is that if I said, okay, y'all, I'm going to teach you how to juggle. And we're all going to sit where we are. We're going to learn to juggle tonight. Now, for our first lesson, I've got razor-sharp steak knives. And I want each of you to start juggling your steak knives. What's going to happen? You're going to get cut up. Who else are you going to cut? The person next to you, right? And that's pretty much middle school social processing. It really is very unattractive. And they're trying all different things. Now, in the angst picture, there's the teenagers swirling around in their angst. A philosopher named Kierkegaard came up with the term angst, which is all their emotions mixed together. And teenagers are notorious for doing something that brings them immediate relief and makes them get out of their angst, like stepping on the gas in the car. So for you guys out there, remember the first time you punched it on your old man's car? How'd you feel? You felt in control of the world, right? Now when you hit a tree or the red lights are going off behind you and the siren, how do you feel then? Even more out of control, right? So they do stuff that for immediate, smoking cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, whatever, it feels great. They get a relief, only to have more angst. What you're trying to do is help them direct all that energy into shooting stars. And it was Nietzsche who said, out of chaos comes a shooting star. And that's what you're hoping with your teenagers. And I think we saw some great Olympians who are clearly shooting stars, who have the same angst as everybody else. I remember telling the kids once, you know, Missy Franklin, she has teen angst too. She's got the same brain as any other teenager. But is she doing some good stuff with it? Yeah, she's really directed, and she seems like a really nice girl. She's not trying to use her status to bully other kids, right? She seems genuinely compassionate and friendly. Again, when you're parenting teenagers, you got to slow them down. Spontaneity is the worst thing for teenagers, and they're incredibly spontaneous. So unless you have a rule about how far ahead you need to call about an overnight, you can expect that curfew's at midnight, and at 11:59, your teen daughter, Stephanie here, I know Stephanie, is going to call and say, well, Mom, Susie invited us to spend the night. Is that okay? And you're like, well, honey, you know, you were supposed to call me earlier, and you're supposed to be home right now, right? They're really spontaneous, so you really want to slow them down as much as possible because they're incredibly impulsive. All right, next slide. Now, I want to talk about exceptional kids in particular. So we're going to turn even more now to exceptional students. And just as a couple beginning points that I want you to keep in mind before we talk about this. First of all, I heard a speaker years ago, and she said, we don't have LD kids. We don't have ADHD kids. We don't have ASD kids. Now, at first I'm thinking, oh my God, is this some crackpot or something? You know, like what's she doing, turning the hands of time back? And then she said, we have kids who might happen to have dyslexia. We have students who might happen to have ADHD. We have students who might have autism. What's the difference? if you put the label first, what happens to that kid's perception of themselves and your perception of them? You should always remember they're a kid first, or a teenager first, with the same desires and drives as almost every other kid on the planet, okay? And you have to keep that in mind. You don't want to lose the fact that we're going to the tutor again, and we just got the bills from the last tutor, and we're doing the summer program, we're doing a social skills group, and they're still a kid. You always have to keep that in mind, okay? Coordinating with other people. You need somebody to coordinate all the stuff you're doing with your kid, and you need to make sure everybody knows what's going on. That's really essential for exceptional kids. And especially when the school has a substitute. Can a substitute just destroy everything you've been working on, right? I had a little girl, Carrie Ann, this is 20 years ago. Her mom was so hopping mad, little Carrie Ann was just crushed because the teacher had agreed with her mother to use a black pen to circle the mistakes. Unfortunately, she didn't tell the substitute. And what color did the substitute have? The red pen. Now, for some reason, my mother in college, when I would write letters home from college, felt compelled to circle the misspelled words with the red pen and mail it back to me. As if somehow I would read it and go, wow, I finally know how to spell that. I'm so thankful, right? But little Carrie Ann, the substitute, didn't know about the red pen for her. So everybody needs to be on the same page, right? Also, in terms of social emotional struggles for exceptional kids, most of the time they're considered what are called secondary symptoms. So to have dyslexia, what's the problem? What's the main problem? It's the same thing I hate, phonics. You don't do phonics. That's pretty much the main problem. You have a hard time reading. That has nothing to, they don't test your social and emotional abilities for dyslexia. That's not part of the test. But what do you see with dyslexic kids over time emotionally? How do they feel? They start to look pretty much like Piglet at first. They get worried about what's coming up, the spelling test. You know, they're going to get called on in class. I was terrified of being called out to read out loud, right? They get a little rabbity, right? When you ask them to try it again, right? Or you missed that one on the homework. Or that voice, Lily, my daughter Lily does this Lexia, do you all know it? It's a computer-based reading program. And the little voice says, oh, try again. And there's been a couple times when that voice has gone off about 3 times, and Lily's like, I hate her. You know, and I'm like, I hate her too. She's so irritating, right? And it's always so like, try again. And you're like, oh, shut up. You get frustrated, and over time, you feel pretty helpless. You get to be Eeyore. Like, you're never going to master this, right? Or you're phobic about people noticing, okay? For me, I can remember the kids who had finished the chapter first, and what would they do with their book? Close it. I'm done. And I'm on page 2, okay? Now, that's no different than the kid who wins the race on the track field at the PE class and goes across the line going, yeah, I'm first. Now, what's the PE coach going to say immediately to that kid? Stop bragging. Knock it off, right? Everybody, we're just concerned about effort. But in the classroom, when that kid says, well, I'm on level 28 of the SRA reader. I don't even know if they still have those things. Remember those SRA readers? I was like on level 3, right? The SRA reader, I'm like on level 3, and some guy's like, I'm on level 25, right? And he's picking up his gold edition SRA reader, right? How am I feeling? Not so good, right? So you start to feel that hopelessness and helplessness and frustration. So everything gets more turbocharged. And so the secondary symptoms, and I've often said, you know, probably the emotional impact of having ADHD or learning disabilities or autism, that over time becomes a bigger problem than the dyslexia ever was. That's the bigger impediment. My pleasure connection with reading. I remember, I don't have many memories of, my mom had 5 kids. We were always playing, but I sort of remember reading some of them basic books when I was in preschool. But in 1st grade, when the teacher read names, he said, okay, these students are going to be the monkey reading group. And then she read most of the kids' names. She said, these are the giraffes. So the monkeys were the gifted kids, right? The accelerated students. The norm was the giraffes. And then I was hoping for wolf, that I was going to be a wolf. And she said, well, the following 3 students will be in the turtle group. Now, what happened to my pleasure connection with reading that minute at 1st grade? it was gone. There was no pleasure connection. And I didn't reclaim it till I was like about 30 years old. And I can remember the first novel, I read it with my son's wife, his mother, my wife at the time, The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. And we laid on park benches reading it together. She was a phenomenal reader, she is. And I can remember I actually read a novel. For the first time in my life, I was 30 years old. It took me that long to develop a pleasure connection with reading. I read all the time now, I love it. But first grade, that was gone, right? Now my psychological defense, you have to understand your kids need to defend themselves. Does any kid want to feel like they're an idiot? No, that's the worst feeling in the world, right? So you got to come up with some logic that would make sense, as in my mind, why I was a turtle. Guess what I came up with? It was brilliant too. Real boys don't read. Real boys play football or they play army after school. And any boy that would go home after school or in the summertime choose to stay inside and read a book was not a real boy, okay? That I'm a guy. Reading is for girls, right? Now, did that improve my reading in any way whatsoever? No. And I learned so many ways to avoid reading. I had it all down. Third grade, I did book reports on Swiss Family Robinson, reading like the first sentence out of each page. And I actually passed, right? I learned little strategies to avoid reading as long as I could, okay? It didn't help me. But emotionally, how did I feel? I'm cool. I'm a boy. I'm playing Army this afternoon. I just scored a touchdown yesterday. I feel great, except when it came to reading. And then my anxiety was there. Would I be called on to read in front of the class, right? 7th grade, Sunday school teacher asked me to read out of the Bible in front of the junior high group with girls in the class, okay? I had to stand there and read out of the Bible. I butchered Jehoshaphat. I think it was King Jehoshaphat. And I'll never forget this kid looked at me, the Richardson boy said, "What are you, a dumbass?" In front of everybody. Everybody's giggling. That day when I went home, what did I say to my mother? I am never going back. I'm not going back. And she said, well, you got two choices. You're either going to have to go back, because you got to go to Sunday school. You can either go back to that, or you can go teach first grader Sunday school. Guess what I picked? It was great. I had so much fun with those kids. And I was probably helping my own reading, teaching them at the time, right? Little first graders, I'm improving my own reading. So she gave me a way to still participate in the Sunday morning program, but in a way that was much more comfortable with me. And she also said, if you want, I'll go talk to that teacher for you and make sure you don't have to read out of the Bible again. And I was so embarrassed. I didn't want her talking to the teacher about it all, okay? So I know you all talk to the teachers, right? But I want you to, and you have to. If you don't, and you don't coordinate, what happens to your kid? They're toast. But you got to remember, when you're in middle school, do you want anybody talking about you? Do you want your parents talking to the teachers? Do you remember what that feels like? To think that other people are talking about you as if they know your life? When you're a teenager, how does that feel? Mortifying, right? That's why it's so important that we help the students learn to do it for themselves. So that middle schooler needs to be doing that. They need to be taking the reins of their emotion and feel like they can at least assert themselves with a teacher. Okay, growth curve. Oh, the other thing is, beginning point, developmental perspective. Does anything change for an ADHD kid immediately? No. You go over it and over it and over it and over it, and you're looking for long-term change. You're not looking for immediate change. You really have to keep the perspective. What I think for exceptional kids, if we say the top line is the neurotypical kid, bottom line is the exceptional student, they generally speaking are usually still behind, but we're growing. So in our social skills groups that we do, I'm helping the kids catch up to their age level, but as they're catching up to their age level, what's happening to the neurotypical kids? They're moving up more, right? So we're always a little bit behind. Every now and then I'll get the middle school or high school kid who will just blossom, okay, or college kid will just blossom. Usually it's because of what? A boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Your junior high son who's never showered or used cologne or washed their hair or combed it. Once they get in a relationship, what happens? They get Axe, and they're putting Axe all over themselves, and they're combing their hair, okay? So every now and then you get spontaneous growth. For me, junior year in high school, I had a professor who I got to honor at his retirement, at Lutheran High School in Missouri, Dr. Prallo, my Civil War teacher. I loved history. And it was the first time I had a teacher that could care less how I spelled or what my grammar was. He just wanted to know my ideas. And I got an A's class, and I went from being a pretty much 2.5, 3.0 student in high school to graduating number 10 in my college class. I had 1 B in college and all A's in graduate school. It just blew me up, just turned on the fire for me. I never knew that reading and learning could be fun until his class. So some of your kids, they're 14, 15, you're like, when is it going to happen? Some take time. You never know when the flower's going to bloom, right? Lily and I saw some crocuses in the backyard the other day, and I'm like, honey, look at the first crocuses. Well, I'm guessing tonight those crocuses wish they had little puffy coats on, because it's pretty darn cold out, right? But then you got the daffodils, right, and the tulips, and then you got your other flowers coming up, and then maybe August, July, you got the roses that come out. Which one lasts the longest? The roses, right? Clint Eastwood was learning disabled, and his mother they told his mother, she said, well, you know, he's just a slow learner. And Clint Eastwood said, I guess that's why I'm still around, because I got a slow start, but I'm still here, right? He's in his 80s, still producing movies, okay? He was exceptional as well. Okay, next slide. We're going to crank along. 5 areas of your kid, they're all interconnected. So the student out on the playground, he has a tiff at the football game. I think this fellow over here interfered with me, and I'm pissed because I dropped the ball, and I think he interfered with me, and I'm yelling at him, and we get sent inside, and I get into the classroom, and the class is starting math work. How am I feeling right then? I'm still pissed about recess. And what am I thinking about? Tomorrow, I'll exact my revenge, right? The whole math lesson, what happens to my intellectual development? It's not happening. So these social struggles parlay into emotional deficits that parlay into intellectual deficits. So they get connected. There was some great research done with 5th grade ADHD students that if you helped them with their social skills, they felt better about themselves emotionally, and they had better grades. Their grades went up. There's some incredible research about social and emotional development programs in schools. They work great. They help kids feel better about what they're doing. They're more likely to come to school. They have fewer discipline problems. They have better grades. What are we cutting out of school in America? Social and emotional development programs, PE, all the things that actually would enrich them to be better human beings, we've cut out. Next slide. Lifetime of messages. We were talking about the negative messages I got. You got to think about your kid. They start out, they're getting messages from primary caregivers, from you, grandparents, family, siblings. They go to school, they start getting messages from others, and eventually they start giving messages to themselves. Now, you want your kid, let's just grab a ratio out of the air, and it's statistically about accurate. Think of their emotional cup. 80% of the emotions in their cup should be positive or negative. Positive. Feelings of, I can do it. I can take on challenges. I'm competent. I'm capable. And not just fake ones. So you can tell your kid, oh, you're so sweet. You're just so talented. You're just wonderful. Till about age 6. At about age 6, guess what the kids figure out? You're just saying that. This art project sucks. I didn't even try, because you're telling me it looks great. I didn't even try, right? So it has to be, as they get older, it's for things they're doing. And you're hoping that 80% of those things are positive. 20% are going to be negatives. Do negatives help us mature? Yes, when my sister in middle school said, don't wear white socks with those shoes and those pants, you look like a dork. Did that help me mature? Of course. Right? If she said, don't pick your nose in front of girls, is that good advice? That's great advice. Now, do we want more than 20% though? Probably not, right? And if you want to motivate a kid to change, in the research, if you want to motivate, and this was done on ADHD boys, which are pretty tough characters to motivate to change, 80% of the time you should reinforce them with positives. You should connect with them positively and use positive reinforcement, and 20% of the time negative. And it needs to be for prudent situations, things that really matter. Now, for some of you, if you're honest, how many of you are sort of 80% negative? It happens quick. And yeah, it really does. It really is easy to get to the negative and to react fast, and especially with fast-paced families. We all have our families are way too fast-paced. You're rushing, the kid's falling behind, and you just start yelling, right? But we're hoping they're filled with positives. So when they engage their thinking, feeling brain, that part on the right side, when they're starting to think about feelings, you're hoping they're going, you know, I got all worked up with anxiety about going to that new soccer team last year, but once I got there, I felt great and I made friends. So when Mom asked me about joining gymnastics this year, I bet it's going to be like soccer, where I'm a little nervous because I have anticipatory anxiety, but I bet I'll get over it and make new friends. Okay? And it was such a warm fuzzy, and I met Susie last year, and she's my best friend now. Okay? That's what you're hoping's in there. Okay? Or you're hoping that, gosh, the teacher called me to read in front of the class. And I remember last time I just did a flawless job, and my best friend said, oh, you did so great reading out loud. I can't wait to raise my hand and volunteer to do it again. Okay? For the exceptional kid. Are those the things that are in there? No. There's a lot of negatives. They get 10 times the negatives of other kids. So the ADHD kid gets 10 times the negative compared to other kids. There's sometimes for some of the kids, my son had a friend when he was little who was a spirited young man. I'll call him Bob. And my guy, you would hear Bob's name called out 40 times a day. Bob, Bob, Bob. And I'm thinking, that kid must hate his name. He must want to change his name. He hears it all the time. And it was all negative, right? It gets pretty filled up with the negative stuff, okay? Then from others, the classmates, the teachers. As you get older, you have to be able to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and give yourself positive messages after a tough day. You had a tough day at work. You pull yourself together with, I was trying my hardest. You know, I made a mistake, but I was trying my hardest. I'm still a good person. I can still do it. Now, if your mother calls you, now my mom's 87. We're seeing her this weekend. If I have a tough time, if the agent doesn't pick up my book and I'm feeling down, and my mom calls and says, oh, well, honey, it's okay. You're so special. Is that going to be the base for my self-esteem for life? No, right? I need to be able to do that for myself and give myself positive messages. But what you see with the exceptional kid is the negatives. Go. We're going to really crank. Here's one for a little boy, Robert. Years ago, he drew a picture of what it was to be stupid. And he said, that's my light bulb going off in class, giving my ideas. And all the other kids are saying, no, 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 that's stupid. Right? And then that picture on the right side, he said, that's my brain, it's no good. He was like 8 or 9 years old, right? Not a warm fuzzy. Okay. Cycle of delayed problem solving. For exceptional kids, they often approach the world in this haphazard sort of manner, not in a scientific method to solve social or emotional problems. First of all, often not really aware that there is a problem. A couple years ago, I was in a 5th grade class. It was time for the kids to go to art class. 21 students got up and went to art class. One 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 5th grade girl was sitting there still doodling. The teacher and I are there talking up front. And finally the teacher turned, sat her, and we're like, honey, would you look up and look around? Do you notice anything? She was like, everybody's gone. She's like, yeah, they went to art, honey. You were supposed to go to art too. She's like, oh, I didn't hear, right? So not even aware that a problem exists. The kid goes, you reminded him to get his math book. He goes to the locker after school to get his math book. He grabs it, he puts it on top of the locker, then he's getting his science book, and then he's getting his lacrosse stick out when his best friend says, come on, lacrosse practice starts in 2 minutes, we gotta hurry. He's like, okay, grabs his lacrosse book, his science book, slams the locker, and he's off. And he gets home, and his mom says, do you have all your books? And what's he say? Oh, yeah, Mom, I got it all. I remember this time. Later on, it's math time. Where's the math book? On the locker, right? And at first, the kid's probably going to say, no, I had it. You must have moved it. I'm sure you moved it, because I had it on the kitchen table, or my brother did it. I know he's always playing games on me, right? It's back on the locker, right? So we don't see a problem exist. Limited perceptions. Exceptional kids tend to really get sort of focused on their perception of things. So if you tell the ADD kid, if he says, can we go to Dairy Queen? And you say, sure, honey, if you get your homework done, you get your room picked up, your sister gets home on time, and I get started, we'll go to Dairy Queen. What'd that kid just hear? We're going to Dairy Queen, okay? Now, he doesn't really perceive that there's a bigger picture. He's just focused on his own gratification. I've watched with Lily. It amazes me with her ADHD. She's a passionate child, absolutely passionate, and a sweetheart, just darling. But when she gets attracted to something, it's like that's all that exists in the world. And I know someday, I can picture, she's a delightful little girl, just beautiful. I can see her getting on the back of some guy's motorcycle with no helmet, going, "Bye, Daddy!" And I'm going to be like, "My God, what are you doing?" Will she have any clue why I'm upset? None. Not one bit. She'll just be like, "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life, going on a motorcycle ride with this guy." And I'll be terrified. She doesn't perceive the things. When things go bad, it's the big explosion. Anxiety, anger, frustration, it's usually pretty big. That little boy with the Dairy Queen example came down. He said, "Okay, Mom, I'm ready." She said, "Well, you didn't finish your homework." "Well, I started it." "Well, but you didn't pick up your room." "Well, I know, I'll do it when we get back." Mom says, "Well, no, honey, we're not going." Little Michael blows up, gets all upset, and calls his dear mother a scum-sucking bottom dweller. He was in 3rd grade, which I thought was quite creative, okay? Mom's now crying. She sends him up to his room. Does he have any idea how his mother feels? None whatsoever, right? Not a clue, okay? Now, a couple minutes later, he comes back downstairs. And guess what he says? "Are we going now?" Right? He's done with it because he was frustrated, mad at her, but then he thought, if I ask again, maybe I'll get to go. So he's all pretty excited now. She's crying and says, "Well, how can you think we'd be going? What's wrong with you?" And little 3rd grade Michael says, "Is it PMS?" That is a true story. Now, I know where he heard it. I know where he heard that line, right? But he has no perception of her feelings or that other people don't get over things so fast. Exceptional kids, especially ADHD kids, tend to process emotions really quick. How do you solve this? Again, it's haphazard, not really think about time management, thinking about organizing. It's just more of a slapstick approach to how to solve things. We don't think about the consequences. There are kids, believe it or not, in middle school, at Stanley Primary, where Stephanie's from, there's middle schoolers right now that are doing their homework thinking about how they're preparing themselves to get into Stanford. It's probably a girl, okay? Most of the boys probably aren't doing that yet, okay? But there are kids that do think long-term positive. They don't think about the negatives, okay? So the average ADHD kid, statistically, they have 400 times the accidental death rate of other kids. Because when the kickball goes across the road, what do? They run out, right? When the football went on my roof when my son was in 2nd grade and his little friend got up on the roof by stacking up trash cans on top of each other, was he really thinking about the consequences? No, right? So we don't think about the negative consequences. It's also hard to understand for your kid who's doing the avoidance thing, like I did. The avoiding reading or reading out loud or reading at all, did that help me get to be a better reader? No. Now, was I thinking about that? No. What was the only thing I was thinking about? Emotional survival. That's all I was trying to do. Just trying to survive emotionally. That day. I'm just trying to survive that day emotionally. And keep it at bay, right? So you don't perceive that. Was I able to understand that that was going to take me that much longer to read? No. I was just thinking about that day. And then prisoners of the moment. Again, it's you react, you get upset, and you just want to forget about it. You feel shame, humiliation. For most of the kids, if you try to get them to talk about it afterwards, what do they say? Either, "I don't want to talk about it," or I forgot, right? Does anybody like bringing up painful stuff? No. But Lincoln said, unless you understand the past, you're bound to repeat it, okay? Now, one of the best parenting strategies I'm going to give you, and then we're going to get to strategies, the half-double rule. So if your kid messes up, they got a problem, okay? If you tell them what the consequences are. If they accept responsibility, they talk to you about it, they can use their thinking, feeling brain and tell you about what they were feeling and what they did and how they acted and what the consequences were, you cut the consequence in half. If they don't, you double it. So if you lost 1 day electronics, you get half a day back. If you're thoughtful and you think about it all and talk with you in a calm way. And it's not just, sorry. I'm sorry my brother made me push him. That doesn't work, okay? It has to be a thoughtful comment. If not, then it's 2 days. They have 2 days of lost electronics. So you really want to get them out of the prison of the moment. Next slide. Realms of control. This fits in with just a natural kid desire. Kids want to feel in control of their life. They don't want to feel like they're the baby. Kids love to feel like they're maturing and that they're in control and they get to decide what TV show to watch, or whether they can pick this item for food or that item or whatever it is, or their own money. They can spend their own money. My little daughter loves saving her allowance and saving up for the latest thing. For kids with special needs, that problem solving is not there, so they don't often feel in control. Now, the compulsion for the parent is, if your kid's struggling, what do you want to do? Help them. But then who's in control? You are. And that's the most delicate thing of a balance beam. You're going from you in control to the kid in control as an adult, okay? So you're pushing as much on this side as you can. Parent for independence. You want your kids to be independent. Parent as much as you can, but don't let them hang himself, okay? So you give enough rope for the dog that it can't jump over the fence and hang itself. You make it shorter, okay? So you want to push independence, but with exceptional kids, you do have to pick up the pieces a lot of time and keep them from really destroying themselves. Does that make sense? So for my son, when he was in 4th grade, I didn't know what his homework was from 4th grade on. I never asked. All I'd ever say is, how long is it going to take you? Maybe we can watch the Nuggets game tonight, or the Avs or something, okay? Didn't want to know what his homework was. That was his responsibility. He was able to do that. Now, if your kid is in 4th grade and they're exceptional and they've got ADHD especially, and you just let them on your own, what's going to happen? Nothing. No work's going to happen at all. So you're always finding what's that ideal relationship for your involvement, but also lets them maintain a sense of self, that they feel in control. They want to feel in control. You need to let them feel in control. Next one. Solid foundations, positive messages. This all flows from what we've been talking about. Every kid needs lots of positives from you. You love them. They're the joy of your life, both for existing and for what they're doing. So when they're accomplishing things, you're really praising effort. Effort's a big one. And the progress they've made compared to themselves. Okay, I explained to a little girl the other day, I said, you know, I'm an intermediate. I got up, before I blew out my knees, I was doing really steep blue runs. Birds of Prey I did once. And I'm really proud of that. Now, one of you might be going like, well, I do double diamonds. That guy sucks. But I said to the little girl, I said, but you know, I didn't ski till I was 21 the first time, and I was at Keystone at Christmas, and the lift came around, and the guy said, okay, sir, grab the bar and sit down. And I grabbed the bar, and I sat down, but I sat down too soon, and I missed the seat. And I was getting pulled up into the sky, and the guy was going, let go, sir, let go. And my older brother was going, pull yourself up, you weenie. And finally, I let go, I crashed, and then the indignity of being placed into the chair when it stopped, and 500 people laughing. Now, to go from that to doing the Birds of Prey, is that pretty good progress? That's great progress. Do I do double diamonds? No. Can I still feel good about myself? Yes. So the positive message is for effort and measuring progress against yourself, not worrying about the other kids in the class, okay? Again, that 80% positive, only 20% negative. When I talk to teachers, I'm like, have nicknames for your kids. A child with many names is well loved. So you want to have nicknames. You're watching the sarcasm. Is it easy to be sarcastic as a parent when you're frustrated? Oh, baby. And some of the stuff they do, it's so easy to be sarcastic. I mean, they just like walk right into it. And you're like, my brain's thinking about 10 sarcastic things to say. You've got to watch it. You've got to zip your tongue, right? It really hurts. So you're trying to always be as positive as you can. Emotional sharing opportunities, the emotions, they're collecting them all day long. Your kid's getting 10 times the negative. They've been embarrassed, they've been shy, they struggled socially, right? They need opportunities to share those. Now, the first thing when you're doing that, understand your own grief. How many of you have some grief about your kid being exceptional? Every hand should be up. Right? We all have that. That's there. But you got to know your own grief. You got to own it yourself. Keep it away from your kid. Otherwise, you're going to overreact. So if your kid's a little frustrated and upset and anxious, and then you're all anxious, and you want to send emails to 3 of the middle school teachers that night, what happened to that problem? It just got really big. And then you find out the kid made the whole story up anyway. right? Because he actually didn't do his homework and he was trying to get out of it. So he came up with this big scenario to make you feel bad and anxious about him. And it was all a lie anyway. So know your own grief, keep it out of there, okay? Think about fly fishing. So in fly fishing, you're just delicately putting out the fly. Bait fishing for feelings would be like saying, my daughter Stephanie comes home and I say, how was your day, honey? I get the F word, fine, right? Okay, how are you feeling? Okay, fine, right? So I have to be a little trickier. I have to fly fish for her. And I'm going to pick her up and I'm going to say, oh, honey, I was over at that boutique we liked that we saw in Cherry Creek and I just saw the cutest dress today. It was just fabulous. And I had coffee with my friends. It was so much fun. And oh, that outfit looks great on you today. And oh, how was your day, honey? And we're just chit-chatting, right? And then I might throw in something about, oh, you know, wasn't there that science test, right? And hopefully she's going to say, oh, yeah, and, you know, and then open up, okay? You got to be kind of sneaky. You're just like laying it out there, right? Just kind of putting out little feelers. Find out information from other parents, find out what's going on, and you just give an opportunity to talk, to kind of piece together emotions and behavior, and to be insightful. Does your kid need to grieve their learning disability too? Yes. My daughter, Lily, bless her heart, she has to grieve her past. Now, there's times when at 9:30 at night when she doesn't want to go to sleep, and she'll say, well, Daddy, I need to talk to you about Grandpa. And I'm like, oh, that's just bullshit. She just wants to stay up. She doesn't want to talk about it. There's nothing here that has anything to do with her grief. She just wants to stay up, okay? Other times, I can tell that she really does, that this is more than just wanting to stay up. Interestingly enough, you're teaching your kids techniques, so we got Lily headphones, those noise-canceling headphones. They work great. She uses them at school. Sometimes she does her homework at the table, at the counter with me, and I'll be reading the paper or something, and she'll be working on her homework. But every now and then she'll say, well, it's kind of noisy in here. You got NPR on. I want to go work in the living room. I'm like, okay, honey, I'm glad you're taking responsibility for yourself. Find a place that's quiet. Now, half the time, if I go in the living room, what do I find? She's doing her homework. What do I find the other half of the time? She's playing with a dog or her Barbies, right? And she's just using that so she can go play. It had nothing to do with her needing quiet time to do her homework. She just wanted to go play, right? When you have the emotional sharing opportunities, you get to know your kid a little bit better so that you can kind of say, I'm guessing you just need a break right now, don't you? Because I bet if you go in that library, you're going to start horsing around, aren't you? And at least you can get on the same page together. Problem solving, it's getting out of that haphazard approach. One of my students years ago made up a system called STAR, Stop, Think, Act, Review. It doesn't matter what system you use, but you need to slow them down and solve problems. Does that take time? Yes. Your parenting takes more time. It needs to be more preventative. So before you get in the car to head on a trip or something, you got to talk about who's sitting where. And when that other kid comes, where are they going to sit? And what are we going to do to entertain ourselves? And you got to go over all the ground rules. If you don't, what happens? It's just hell. We're fighting over the seats, right? My mom, we had 5 kids. Every kid got the front seat Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I was Thursday's child. I got the front seat on Thursdays. I was the 4th kid. That was a good system. That worked out great. We had the same dinner every Monday through Friday, too. It worked out great. So you're taking the time to help them stop and calm down, think about what's going on, take a few deep breaths, understand what they're feeling, think of some solutions, give it a try and see what happens, okay? So that's the focus you want to put on. You don't want to solve it for them. The helicopter parent, they're always hovering and solving it before it happens, right? Well, you're getting on the car for the field trip. Don't you need to use the restroom, honey? Now, she's in middle school. Does any 12-year-old girl want your mother asking you about peeing in front of everybody? Probably not, right? Now, before you get there, you might say, if she's got a bladder problem, you're like, don't forget about the bathroom. Okay, Mom, before she gets out of the car, right? So you're pushing, you solve the problem. It's your problem. See if you can figure it out. Even if they fail, you're celebrating their effort. You're happy they tried. You're thrilled that they gave the effort. You're really pleased with that, okay? Sometimes you do step in and just do it. But by and large, you're trying to help them solve the problem. Let them take the responsibility. Don't do the helicopter thing. Focus on effort, that we at least tried. Does that make sense? Okay, next slide. Just guidelines. These are all listed out. I'll just review them and we'll end in 3 minutes. Know your student. We just talked about their brains. Don't be afraid to tell other parents about your kid too. If you got an ADHD kid and they're going on a play date, call up the other parent and say, oh, by the way, he gets a little wild sometimes. Just count to 3. With Lily, I have a phrase, and I tell the other mothers to use it too, which is, watch it, Missy. And if I say that, what does she know? She's pushing it. She better stop. She's going to have a consequence. She won't have another play date. Okay? And I tell all the parents, I give them the authority. I say, look, if she's having a tough time, just call me up. Tell her that the play date's over, right? Or count. Give them the structure they need, slow them down. Clear rules and consequences, social and emotional goals. It's best to come with goals for social and emotional stuff if you can come from their needs base. So you got the hyperactive boy that's, pushing on the seatbelt to irritate his brother in the front, okay? And the brother's going, stop it, and you say, would you stop it, you're driving me nuts. If you got the junior high ADD guy, what's he thinking right now? Ka-ching, baby, I just won at Blackhawk. This is great, I got my brother pissed, now my dad's pissed at me too, this is so exciting, okay? So what you're looking for is an opportunity later when Johnny opens up and my son says, hey, I haven't been invited to a birthday party in like 2 years. And then I can say, well, I notice you kind of like to irritate your brother, and I'm wondering if that happens with the kids at school, and maybe if you didn't do that, you'd get invited to birthday parties. I'm coming from his needs base. Does that make sense? Not mine for him to stop it. It's for him because he wants to have friends. I did have a little 5th grade boy. He's in my group right now. He told us, Christy back there and he said, I want to be in your group because I haven't been invited to a birthday party in 2 years. And I'm like, okay, cool, man. We're going to get you to a party. We want you to get to a birthday party. Social emotional goals, positive message, talk about that half double rule. Always talk about risk. What's the risk of the behavior? Rituals and adventures. Do stuff with your kid every day. Even though my reading was struggling and everything, Sunday night I could count on our family watching Bonanza. It's an old show. And then having grilled cheese and tomato soup and then playing cards for an hour. Uno and then pinochle. I could count on that every Sunday of my life. It didn't matter about my reading. I knew we were going to have that Sunday night. Families should have rituals. Get on and do your adventures with your kids. I have a website called adventuredad.org. It's a blog and a website. It's all dedicated to doing stuff with your kids outdoors, getting your kids outside. This is for dads, but we got some women's stuff on there too. My wife's on the video in there. We got a bunch of videos on how to start a fire, how to do all sorts of stuff. Next. Go ahead. Clicker. Thank you. His frontal lobe's shutting off. Emotional sharing time, we talked about that. The problem solving, biting your tongue. The sign of a good parent is the number of teeth mark in their tongue. Make sure you're biting it a lot, right? Limit electronics and thoughtful activities. You know those dopamine levels we were talking about that are too low? So if they're too low, you can't pay attention. If they're in the right zone, you have perfect frontal lobe functioning. If they get too high, you have a dopamine juice, 16 levels high, when you play electronic games. And the only executive function left is focus, like a zombie. And you're totally into that game, and you can't turn it off, and you have no perception of time. And then when you're done playing, your dopamine levels crash down, and guess how your kid's emotions are? Irritable. Have you ever seen a kid play a video game for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then turn it off? They're hell. And if they try to go to bed right then, guess what? Their brain is just agitated. And they can't learn new stuff either. All their brain is doing is memorizing the little pattern they did in Minecraft. That's all it's doing. So less electronics, more thoughtful activity, model building, art, welding, anything. Get them into thoughtful activities that take planning and time. Care and feeding the frontal lobe, water, sleep, exercise, lots of protein. That's what your frontal lobe needs. It needs those 4 things. Again, on the dopamine juice, guess what else? So electronic, action-oriented games will spike your dopamine levels 16 times. Guess what else does that? Marijuana. When they get high, what do they do for 2 hours? Just sit there and talk about, I wonder how they made her scarf. It's got multiple colors. right? They're just hyper-focused. That's all that exists. After you get off pot, when it wears off, what's your mood like? You're crappy. Same thing as a video game. It does the same thing. Okay, last part, and then we'll end. Structured social interactions. That's, if you got the younger kids, that's a good recipe for how to have a good play date. The one that's most essential is ending on a fun activity and a positive note, hopefully, because kids are always prone to remember what they did last, okay? So if they had a pleasant end with your kid, they go home and their mom says, how was the play date? What are they going to say? It was great. If your kid had a meltdown right at the end, what's the kid going to say to his mom? It was terrible. It was awful. He was crying the whole time, right? So it's just a nice structured approach. Finally, the role of groups. We do groups. Our summer groups are coming up for school years. We got groups from preschool all the way up to age 35. What I like about them is they're hands-on. We get to practice all this stuff. We get to work with it. So every Wednesday night, Christy and I do 4th and 5th grade boys, and we're having a great time. And for the one time of the year, next week, they get to bring their electronics. And I'm going to try to play Minecraft with them. But that's once a year. The rest of the time, we're doing activities. We're having fun and learning how to socialize each other. The two best things, one little boys last week, and I'll end with, we were doing thank you, what you're thankful for, before we ate our Girl Scout cookies. And he looked at me and said, I'm thankful for you because then I get to be with these guys. And I was like, that's so cool. And the other one was 15 years ago on a camp out. Big Anthony, this middle school kid who had no friends, and finally made friends with the other guys because he told a Lorena Bobbitt joke. Remember her? If you Google it, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's too obscure, it's too hard to explain. Told a Lorena Bobbitt joke. He was instantly friends with all the guys. And we were talking around the campfire about what we learned at group. And Anthony looked at me and he said, I learned that I don't need you anymore. I have my friends. And I was like, oh, thank God, it's the best rejection I've ever gotten. Thank you very much for coming. I kept it to 90 minutes. We started late, so I kept it to 90. Okay. Thank you very much.